Hello and welcome to Decipher This, a podcast about music and technology from Ensemble Decipher. I'm Eric Lemmon.
I'm Taylor Long.
Today we are here with Darian Donovan Thomas, who is a Brooklyn-based composer, multi-instrumentalist, and interdisciplinary artist. Darian is interested in combining genres into a singular vocabulary that expresses ideas about intersectionality of both medium and identity. Necessarily, he is interested in the very important process of redacting all barriers to entry that have existed at the gates of any genre. Indeed, he sees this vocabulary of multiplicity as necessarily intersectional, and therefore all-inclusive. He received a bachelor's in music composition from the University of the Incarnate Word, and has held fellowships from the New Amsterdam Composer Lab, the So Percussion Summer Institute, and Bang on a Can. He is currently touring with Moses Sumney, Balùn, and Arouge Aftab.
Darian, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's just kick things off. Can you tell us a little bit how you came to be what you describe as an interdisciplinary artist? Do you view music as like the central practice around which the other things orbit, or do you conceive of your modes of production that you engage with as all holding sort of equal importance in your practice?
Totally, yeah. Well, I think that I've always been really inspired by studying or analyzing how different things collide in order to create total experiences. When I was younger, loving, cartoons and theater and like movies and stuff like that, it was just really interesting to me how there's like music happening or there isn't music happening, and that can have an emotional impact. Or interesting, like these special effects, I guess, negated a concept of space, and like there's no architecture here, this person's just floating and that feels a certain way. It just seemed really obvious to me that having, as an artist, input on all different parts of a thing as it's created could make a really powerful art object. And whereas I didn't have the words for that when I was a kid, I have the words for that now, and understand that means being a integrated media, interdisciplinary, whatever artist, right? I think that music's definitely the main thing, and I kind of like that. And I've been noticing recently and understanding that it makes a lot of sense that I'm starting from music, because everything that I end up touching or interacting with or wanting to interact with, it has the same, what's the way to say this? Music is really interesting because it moves through space. It gets a listener from point A to point B through time. Film does the same thing, but with visual elements. Architecture does the same thing, just spatially. And that's why I'm interested in like doing video work, interested in set design, interested in music, interested in theater, because it's all a matter of how do you tell a story through time and how does a person change throughout that time in interacting with the work. And this is part of why I'm not so into painting or like maybe sculpture, but they don't call to me as much, because I think that element of time and duration is really important to me in a work. And I think that very much comes from music, from being inside of it, from studying it, from being inside of like hour-long pieces by these really old composers, or inside hour-long pieces by like Julius Eastman or something. It's like, this is how I as a performer change over time being inside the thing. And from listening to these pieces and being on the other side of the equation, I know how an audience changes over time listening to these things. And that's really what I want to work with as an artist, I think.
You raise an aspect of architecture and people experiencing space through time as they move through said space. And I find that that's a really interesting conception. So I guess to push on that idea a little bit, when we talk about sculpture, you've done some installation work, right? So how does moving through space with sound in time, how does that interact? Because usually people imagine of like sound sculpture as like something very spatially situated. But obviously, in general, we're situated within time anyways.
No, yeah, I think installation art is interesting because it's like just drama that you can walk on the stage of, or theater that you can walk on the stage of. And yeah, so the installation I did that I think has been my strongest so far was this one back in 2016, I think, called Hang. It was a part of this larger installation called Move On, Get Over It. In 2016 is around the time this was before November, so it was before Trump was elected, but it was at like the fever pitch of all that stuff happening. This might have been in February. So for like Black History Month, and all this was really coming to a heat. And I wanted to make something that could help people understand how it felt to be going through all that, and how it felt to see people be moderate still amidst all the rhetoric and all the things that were being said and all the police brutality that was happening at the time. This was when Black Lives Matter, I think, was officially being branded as a terrorist group also in our country, and lots of embarrassing stuff happening. So I made this work called Move On, Get Over It, and quickly realized that I needed to gear people up to the main piece of it, which was Hang. So it's a 3-piece installation. You walk in, and like on the wall, there's this film being played on a flag, American flag. And the film starts with my little brother, who's 13 years younger than me, just kind of looking around the frame in wonder, followed by my 2 parents on both sides standing sentinel and looking dead on at the camera very sternly, trying to protect. And then on top of that, just layers and layers and layers of police brutality footage. And there's a moment in there where it's like there's been an increase in anti-Semitic sentiments and in like Nazi activity. So there's a moment where there's a swastika and it's just planted really dead on the flag, which was actually an accident, but like, felt extremely appropriate for the time. So there are these things that are just really strong, but it's just a film. It's like, it's something you can look away from. You don't really have to engage with if you don't want to. It doesn't even really have audio until the very end. Then next to that is this other performance thing that it's 2 women with megaphones that have a bunch of terms on them, like nasty woman, angry Black woman, a bunch of curse words and stuff, just drawn very large on the megaphones. And it's these women expressing discontent at like a lot of political figures who were coming into the foreground at that time, right? Including like David Duke, who used to be a grand wizard for the KKK, but was like being elected and stuff. It was a wild time. It was really weird. It still is a weird time. But anyway, you would go through that, and that's more intense because there are 2 people there performing, and like you have to kind of walk through that in order to get to the last part of the gallery, which is where I was doing Hang. And what Hang is I was in a noose for like the 3 hours of the thing, and kind of hanging, holding on to the rope, standing on these like sections torn from textbooks, history books about like Black history, Latino history. There's a quilt that I'm holding that's an American flag at the center, but stitched to all the flags where slaves came from. And behind me are 3 mirrors. Some are kind of broken and half size, but the point is there are mirrors facing back at people looking at me. So there's that thing again of like, I know that you're experiencing this, but in this context, because of what I'm trying to say, because I'm always happy-go-lucky, oh my God, let's watch cartoons, whatever. I wanted people to really understand, like, but also this is what's happening. This is how I feel. I want you to see how you feel seeing how I feel, and then make a decision based on that if you're still like moderate after you leave this gallery, So it's a thing of, you don't have to interact with the first bit, but it's there to prepare you. The second thing is going to confront you no matter what. And then the third thing, you can ignore it if you want, but you are also going to catch a glimpse of yourself ignoring it. So it's like antagonistic in a passive way. And I don't know, I guess I learned a lot from that. I don't like being that pointed all the time. Yeah. At the time, it felt necessary. But more recently, and like with the piece that I'm writing for y'all, it's like, I think there are ways to make people put themselves into the work in a way that's kind of inviting, but in a way that also just really makes them question, like, yeah, what are the things that I can't ignore about the world right now? Or like, what are my favorite memories from childhood or whatever? Because seeing someone else do the thing makes you wonder, I think, as an audience member, like, how would I operate if I were asked to do the same things,
Right.
I know that's a lot. Sorry.
That's a lot, and it's honestly, like we were planning on getting into politics later in the question, but no, like I think this is a great time to kind of bring this up, is because it's on the nose to just talk about these things as being quite a large part of your practice. So We've had over the past few episodes artists from a range of different communities and backgrounds, and this is perhaps a sign of the musical times, and you mentioned this, or political times, and they all engage with political subjects on very many different levels. And you've spoken about your pieces creating either space for escape, and I'm quoting some of your writing here, an uninhibited exploration of how the individual audience member has been handling their existence, or a political space, a classroom of sorts. So even without this artistic statement, I think that people can tell that politics also plays a significant part. You know, like one of your works is titled explicitly ACAB.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you see this politics as interacting with your creative practice? You already mentioned a little bit about this. And perhaps even more importantly, how do you see your creative output as interacting with our real-lived and very political world? So what role do you think art has in informing politics and instantiating change, which is always the tricky thing?
Yeah, I think the point for me and for an artist is to say the thing. And I found that, like, in a really weird way, if you redact emotion from the thing, it helps a lot. Which I don't know that I like that as a truth, but I also just have found it to be a truth. So like with Stephen Clark, right? This piece that I have for percussionists, two toms, based on the shooting of Stephen Clark, who was shot 20 times in his grandmother's backyard because two cops thought that he had a gun when really he just had a white iPhone. It's weird to read up on that story because so many people are like trying to defend the cops, like he deserved it or something. And I'm just like, in my head, I'm like, you know, I don't know if there's any way to defend like two people shooting one person 20 times. Like I can't really think of an instance, even if like it's the worst criminal ever. I'm just like, I don't think you need to do, like, I don't know. I don't think that's really valid in any context. So to prove that point, let's just remove emotion real quick. Let's put this sound of 20 hits in two instruments that are unpitched and therefore can't, well, you know, like in normal rhetoric, be emotional. And let's just have the audience listen to the number 20 a lot. And then after that be like, hey, so how do you feel about that? Because I feel like it's excessive and I think you would too. And it ends up being the case that like, yeah, people agree 20 is too much. There's no reason for that. And I had a lot of people come up to me. This piece was written for So Percussion at the So Percussion Summer Institute. So it was premiered at Princeton, and I knew that it would be performed by like 4 white dudes at an all white space pretty much. And that was kind of the point, was to be like, okay, well, we're going to say this here as a test run for having it said in other places in the country, hopefully in the future. And yeah, I mean, I had people come up to me after the concert and be like, I really hadn't thought of it that way, which was kind of confusing to me because I was like, well, I don't know how else one would think about it, but also fine. The point is like, as long as it communicated and we were able to just look at this datively as opposed to emotionally, great. But it's just, you know, it's like a little frustrating for me. And this is that part where it's like, I don't know that I like this as a truth, even though it is a thing that works in my work. Because it's like, I would want us to be able to look at that emotionally and just come to the same conclusion. But for some reason we can't. So that's fine. So I guess this is a long way to say like, yeah, I mean, I think as an artist, you have to respond to what's happening in the world. More so, I think you're always going to be positioned as responding to what's happening in the world. Even if you're making an active choice not to respond, that's still a choice. And people are going to read into that and apply it to your work. And I guess I just don't like the idea of being read in ways that I don't have a say in. So I take the two-road approach, right? Where it's like, I'm going to do the things that are very directly political. I'm going to write ACAB during the George Floyd protests. I'm going to write a disintegrating foundation under a catastrophe of air about COVID happening at the same time that like all the police stuff was happening. And it's for double bass and the bassist has to sing as well. And it's just like a lot happening in that piece. I'm going to write these things, but I'm also going to write In Times of Panic, I Like to Stay Still, which was a piece that I improvised because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to leave New York or not. And it was giving me a lot of anxiety. This was like in March of 2020, when all the sirens were happening all the time. And it's because I understand, like, if I as a person am going through all this stuff, and if I as a person of color, as a Black, Mexican, like queer person of color, right, in the country right now, I'm going through all this, and I don't want everything to be political all the time, and I need a break from it, then I'm sure other people do too. And I want to be able to give that space to people. And more so, like, I want to be able to give that space to people that are like me, you know, where it's like, there's a meme going around right now on I think about like Netflix saying, oh, we're celebrating like Black voices, and it's just a bunch of pictures of Black trauma. And it's like all these movies that are celebrating Blackness are slave movies and stuff, and we're just like, well, that's not what we want. Like, that's not really celebrating us. That's just a catastrophe porn, and also re-traumatizing. And it's like there are times where all this stuff needs to be talked about. Yes, completely. And I feel like I have a privilege of communication where I can talk about them, and I've figured out ways to talk about these things that are effective, and I need to exercise that and use that privilege correctly. But also people need to rest, and they just need like to be soothed, or to have like a sonic space where they can sob, I don't know, like process everything that's happening. Like, that's really important too, because we're human, you know, we need both things. And I think right now in art, all artists are so well situated to do both things.
To be in your arms tonight, on a balcony, to be held again for the first time, to be hiding in the mist again with another flying head down in the moonlight, flying head down by the rain, flying head down by the moonlight, flying head down by.
Yeah, I have a follow-up. I found it interesting, especially because I do remember sort of 2016, the feeling that maybe change was afoot, and because there was so much police violence was being like actually recognized in a public sphere by white people that I think it hadn't been acknowledged so widely before. But then it kind of felt like nothing changed in some ways, right? And then in 2020, we sort of had the same conversation, it felt like. And all these art groups, ensembles, institutions, you know, in music and in other artistic mediums, like took it as an opportunity to make a statement, which I guess I generally think is good, but I sort of at the same time was confused why they reacted this time but not ever before.
Yeah, no, I think it's completely because of quarantine and COVID. Like, BLM, I think, shut down a highway this time and it made them really popular. They shut down a highway last time and that's what got them called terrorists, like in 2016. I remember kind of vividly those like headlines and being like, wait, what's happening? Like, they're doing the right thing. And it was in response to like, there are just so many names. It's really sad that I can't remember which one it was at that time, but I want to say like maybe Alton Sterling, or I don't know. But yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is that like this time when you shut down a highway, no one had anywhere to go. Therefore, a lot more white people could be on board with it. And that reality isn't really lost on me. I don't think it's lost on any of us. And we're like, yeah, of course, this was fine because it wasn't actually disruptive. It was just performance. And it's much easier to accept performance than, as we all know, right? Because like the easiest way to get ahead as a person of color in our society is through performance, whether it's in sports or in arts or whatever. That's always been the way out. So in a way, we were just in a perfect climate for that to be the case now. And it has timed out correctly with like being at the end of everything Trump was, and a lot more people understanding like that he's not the solution they wanted. Mainly for those people that like were going to vote for Bernie, but then voted for Trump instead because they thought it was the same thing, which was a dizzying thing to hear, but definitely was like the modus operandi a lot, especially in Texas around me. And it was just like, I don't understand you people at all, but okay, whatever. But now that we're on the other side of that, it's like, yeah, look at what we've lived through. Look at what we're in. Look at us being kind of the laughingstock of the world right now as a country. And like, yeah, how are we going to respond to this thing that just happened? Also, like, here are all these people of color saying something very loud. And then here's a direct schism between like government and people. how does that make us feel? And I think everyone was just in enough of a timeout where they were like, yeah, I have to actually wrestle with this. Also in enough of a timeout where they're like, oh my God, an excuse to get outside. I'm going to go and do this. And for however dark and disappointing that is, it comes back to like, it's the same feeling as that truth that I mentioned earlier, where it's like, if you remove the emotion from it, then it works better. It's like, I don't like that. But it is just what it is. And that's, I mean, you know, that's gotten us to this point. So I guess that's okay. It'll be interesting seeing how that operates going forward though.
Yeah.
Which I think is why like a lot of BIPOC people are just like, we're holding receipts, we're keeping track of like who said they would do what and all that stuff. And we'll check back in a year from now and see how it's actually advanced. Because we've been here before, you know? Which maybe sounds doomsday, and it's not meant to be. Like, it's just, you know, a reality that's not surprising. But also, you know, progress is a spiral staircase, right? So, like, it's not really directly from one point to the other. It's a lot of going back and forth, but just a day later.
Yeah. I mean, I think when, you know, I guess a year ago now, basically, a lot of these, again, ensembles, institutions, artists sort of announced initiatives or, like, you know, public commitments to better efforts and, you know, diversifying the artists they're working with, composers they're commissioning, you know, hopefully the audiences that they're trying to reach. And I have been curious to see if it's actually not sustainable as far as the possibility of it being sustained, but sustainable in the sense that the organizations will actually commit to, you know, those principles long term rather than just like, you know, this is what we have to do to maintain a good public image right now because everybody's sort of doing it in a white liberal art world.
Right, yeah. I think so, though. I think it's going to play out because I think what people are understanding now is that, like, you're not taking much of a risk by hiring, like, Black artists or composers or musicians. Like, surprise. It's actually not that different. Except that it is because, like, we also are of an experience that means that we're probably always going to talk about something that needs to be talked about, which is kind of a nice change from lots of classical music, you know? Yeah. The last time I think that there was an influx of voices like this was when there was the huge push for women in like women composers to be in the field. And it's like, yeah, duh, like commission women, like they're remarkable at everything they do. And they also have an experience that needs to be discussed. And they know how to talk about these things in coded ways that are going to get audiences to understand everything they didn't understand before. So it's critical to the progress of our field. Now it's the same thing with Black people. And it's like, fine, yeah, cool. It's nice seeing so many of my peers get into relationships with respected ensembles and therefore become more respected themselves. Is it sad that it's because of this? I mean, the world is what it is. Like, we still need affirmative action and stuff. So, you know.
So we know you recently produced with Phong Tran, who you collaborate with under the moniker Media Queer, and So Percussion, and some other friends' rendition of Julius Eastman's Stay On It. Do you want to talk a little bit about that project and maybe Media Queer in general, what you guys are up to?
Sure. Yeah, Media Queer is fun right now because we've been asked to do a lot of like video stuff and graphic design stuff, which is great. So both Phong and I are interdisciplinary artists. Phong has been getting really into like, I guess CGI or like computer graphics and working with After Effects and coding and stuff like that. It's always been a part of his practice, even since I first saw his solo show 2-3 years ago when I first moved to New York. Whereas I'm more into taking actual footage and then just really distorting it through, I don't know, perspective or layering or whatever in Premiere, right? And I feel like our aesthetics are hilarious because I'm definitely hyperpop, glittery, flowery stuff, and Phong is super dark, opaque, concrete, and it's fun to mash the two to each other because when it works, it's pretty cool. And that's part of why I wanted him to be on the Stay On It thing, because he has a really great scream in him that I was like, this would be really perfect for a certain passage of Stay On It. And also I knew that we'd be able to make a good video for it together, which we did. So the 30-minute film that accompanies it was made by us in like 2 weeks. But yeah, I don't know. It's, yeah, that project of working on Stay On It was really beautiful and profound. It's always fun playing Eastman's pieces because it's like, how much of an argument should we get into? Like me and him. I always feel like there's a weird shadow there. Not that our aesthetics are really similar at all, but also kind of. But the other part is that like he's a Black queer bipolar person. I'm a Black queer bipolar person. So there's like a lot of direct parallels that I always get kind of nervous about. But I also feel like it gives me more of a right to just see the rules that are written down, which I mean aren't even real because that's not the real manuscript, and just be like, what if I just don't do that? What if I do this instead? And it's fun and it opens up, and I feel like it's the way that he would actually want the piece to be handled, much like with a lot of my pieces, where it's like, I'm gonna write this down, but also like, you're the musician, like you know what's supposed to happen right now better than I could, because I'm planning from the past, whereas you're responding in real time. And just being able to solidify that in the context of his work, and therefore in the context of classical music, always feels really refreshing, because you don't always get that freedom as a performer. Yeah, so I don't know, it was a beautiful thing to work on, and I'm really glad that like we were able to do that, and that we were able to make the album art and all that stuff. I'm very happy with that.
Yeah. And you also perform regularly with Moses Sumney, who has really risen as, you know, one of the more important pop artists, I think, in the last few years. How did that collaboration come about, and what's it like working, you know, rehearsing, performing, touring with Sumney, and maybe how's that different from working in the, I'm using air quotes, classical world?
Right, because man, am I not really classical? It's weird. So the way that came about is from a very succinct train of events, which is really funny, but started like 3 years ago. So I did the New Am Composer Lab in like 2018. So through that I met Fong, and we started hanging out, and then made Media Queer later. Through that same New Amsterdam Records Composer Lab, William Britell asked me if I wanted to join him for a residency at Mass MoCA for this thing called Aeon Ritual, which was put on by like Liquid Music and all these cool people. It was really terrifying at the time, because I was like, I'm a child, so I don't know, like, I don't know what you want me to do here. The other people involved were Emily Wells, Seth Alinsky from Sidune, Daniel Wohl, Hannah Ben, who's like this remarkable opera composer, vocalist person. Also William Britell himself, Dopu Leo, who has like this remarkable spaceship, and I mean, like, just his rig is crazy, and he's a cellist, and he did this live sidechaining thing it was wild. And then Ian Chang, who is the drummer of Sunlux and of like Landlady and all these important bands that are just remarkable, right? So I'm here as a child looking at all these people that are already fully in their careers, and I was like, sure. I mean, like, yes, I want to do it. And remember the yes period. I'm like, yes, I want to do it, but also, wow, this is terrifying. So I do it, and it's one of those things where it's like, put a bunch of artists in the room, see what they make. And by the end of 10 days, we had like a 50-minute program thing. I contributed 2 pieces, and then all of us were like playing inside of each other's pieces. And Ian and I got really close during that. A couple of us got really close during that. And Ian in particular later reached out and was like, hey, I'm tour managing or music directing this tour with Kazu Makino. Do you want to play violin in it? And kind of cover a full orchestra, since we can't afford to like bring a full orchestra with us, and also cover some of like Ryuichi Sakamoto's parts on keyboard and stuff. And I was like, yeah, sure, that'd be great. And Kazu Makino's a blonde redhead as well, so I was like, yeah, totally, this would be amazing. So I did that. Small band, just myself, Sam, Evian, Ian, and Kazu. And that helped open up my playing a lot. That also added a pedal to my board, which was great. And then we played a show in LA that both Moses and Mike Haldeman, the guitarist and clarinetist for Moses, were at. And afterwards they came and said hi. And then later I got a phone call that was like, hey, do you want to just try playing some songs together? And I was like, yes, Moses, sure. And he was like, great, I'll be there in like 3 days, learn the songs that I'm going to send you. And then he sent me like the album. And I was like, okay, sure, I'm going nowhere for the next couple of days. And I really didn't. And if you talk to my roommate, Jordan, you can probably find out that I also did a lot of crying during that time. But the point is that I learned it and figured it all out. And when he came, the rehearsal went well. And he was like, yeah, okay, cool. We're going to do like a soft, not real show in North Carolina if you want to come. And I was like, yes. And then I did. And now I'm there. And yeah, I guess touring with Moses is really different from doing all the classical stuff, because like I used to think that classical music was really intense with rehearsal, and now I know I was wrong.
Yep. Yeah.
Classical music's very, very lax, actually. It was really cool. We, because we got to play on the, oh man, what's it called? Late Show? Stephen Colbert, right? Or is it the Tonight Show? Late Show. Anyway, Stephen Colbert. We got to play on Colbert, and we only played one song, but we fully rehearsed that one song for like 3 days, 8 hours a day.
Wow.
And it was then that I was like, this is pop music. Okay, cool. Got it. I understand. Yeah. This is the standard of rehearsal and work. But it also, it's so nice to really cement something that strongly, you know? And I think the cool thing about working with Moses is that he has this really unique ability to ask people to do things that are kind of clearly beyond them at the moment. But whenever he asks it, I think because it's like so clearly what that moment needs in the music, the musician just kind of takes a moment and is like, give me 5 minutes / a day and I'll see if I can do it. Instead of just saying no, because it's hard, which I feel like is more the classical modus operandi of being like, no, my instrument doesn't do that. In the Moses environment, it's like, I'll figure it out. I can probably finagle something. And then you end up being able to play better than you did the day before because of that, you know? And I just know my playing has opened up so much from like working with Kazu, working with Moses, working with Balùn as well. But then Helica Negron and like just really sitting into that space of this new music, but reggaeton, but dream pop sound world. It's helped me figure out so much of my own personal aesthetic as a composer. Yeah, I don't know. Just working with all these people influences my classical work so directly. And I think that's part of the reason why now I'm like, am I a classical C composer? I mean, capital C composer? Because like,
Yeah.
I mean, yes, but also is that really what I want to be? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay, we kind of got into the violin territory, which is such an important part. So you have an acoustic violin, right? Mm-hmm. And it's amplified through a pickup. And so this is getting nitty gritty into the technical aspects here. And I wanted to pick your brain a little bit as to how you see the acoustic nature of the instrument interacting with the electroacoustic world you bring it into, or your collaborators ask you to bring it into. And this is, you know, in contrast to, say, using an electric instrument, so electric violin.
Yeah, totally. So the non-romantic, non-poetic answer is like, I definitely just brought one violin with me when I moved here, right?
Yeah.
And was like, well, it should be the instrument that I can use in orchestra and that I can use on stage. And that was kind of it, because it had to be it. But then over time, like, I have my electric violin here with me now. I just haven't been taking it out as much. But I think that's because, like, I've spent so much time with and been in so many different countries with and been on so many different stages with this one instrument that I understand it in a very total way as it relates to spaces just without being plugged in, and as it relates to spaces being run through my pedal board. And I think that just means that I get to consider the duality of it all the time, even in the Moses sets. Like, we just played at St. John the Divine Cathedral, way uptown, right? Like last weekend, I think. And of course, the first thing I do when I grab my violin in that space is like play Bach, because like here's what it's built for. Like, it was amazing. Yeah. And it was a remarkable feeling. But then later on in the evening, to be able to have it running through the sound system in there, and to know that at one point I'm a sub bass, and at another point I'm just this like crystalline, turn on all the crystallizers and delays and reverbs, ethereal glitter in the air. It feels so great. Also knowing that it's all grounded in the existence of this instrument that's been in this type of space for hundreds of years, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think I really like having the acoustic, because like, it's the one that I've played chamber music on. It's the one that I've played symphonies on. It's the one that I know all the gradations of, which I guess is almost like, and this is not my world at all, but the only metaphor coming to mind is like a polyamorous versus a monogamous relationship, probably, you know? Where it's like, I've spent more time with this one person than this other person, so I just know everything about them better. And I'm just more interested in going through experiences with a person that I know, as opposed to a newer person, is kind of how it feels. And yeah, I guess that informs my practice, because like whenever I'm composing, knowing that I'm going to add electronics to it later, I know exactly when I would do what. I can play on that violin and just like air pedal my pedal board kind of, and be like, yeah, I know exactly what this sounds like going through this set of effects, you know. So I have better foresight at this instrument also.
You have a few projects that draw on Aztec imagery and themes. I was wondering if you could dive into your interest in relationship with Aztec culture, history, and mythology, and explain more about that.
Yeah, totally. A lot of that is coming from my mom's side. So my dad is black, my mom is Mexican, right? And when, like from Mexico City. And when I was younger, like some of my earliest compositions, I guess in 6th grade, when I started playing violin, are about like Greek mythology. And I remember thinking after a while, this is kind of weird that I'm like using Greek mythology and I'm not Greek, even though like it's so all pervasive and stuff. But at the time I was like, I'm sure can't I like use, I don't know, like, isn't there black mythology I can use, or like Aztec, or these things that are actually of my family? Come to find out that doing that on the black side, real hard because of the whole, you know, like, the American slavery thing. So I don't know where in Africa I'm from, therefore there's no way to narrow it down. And wow, there are so many traditions and religions and myths, and they're all remarkable and beautiful, but very different in Africa. And I was like, we're gonna leave that alone. We'll touch on that later when science can help me out, because I just have no way of knowing what's going on that side. But on the Mexican side, I knew that I could turn towards these Aztec practices and these Aztec deities, and I just started reading into the mythology. And I don't know, I guess I've always been really into mythology and this idea of these larger than life figures and these old gods that existed before, and these old systems and rules that people figured out and understood and would work with. And the idea that they're still existing underneath everything that has tried to cover them is really interesting to me too. I don't know, and maybe this is just a thing that you kind of have to wrestle with also in classical music, with like so many of the people whose works you're playing are dead, so you awkwardly have to confront death early on in classical music. And it's like, yeah, well, here are these rules and systems that we're still working with, even though these people are gone, and like their worldviews are completely wrong or completely antiquated or outdated, and we're still performing this opera or doing this thing. So how does that feel at like a, I don't know, almost religious level? And that's when like studying Aztec mythology and things like that became really interesting to me. And in no way, shape, or form am I an expert, because there's just so much to learn, and it's such a rich, deep tradition. But I love visiting it, and it always feels very close to my heart, I guess, because it is like half of me. So yeah, when I was commissioned to do the Afrofuturist Symposium for photography, that's when I made the Xochipilli prints and the photographs. Xochipilli is known as the flower prince and was the, I guess you can say, patron god, deity of like games, music, and homosexual men. And I was like, this is precisely me. So I'm going to like use this to as like a respect towards this god and as a way to keep their name alive, and also as a way to show that, like, because my task in the symposium was to represent the mixed future, and I was like, great, so I can take Afrofuturist principles and apply it to this very old mythology and this old god and merge the two, because I think that the mixed future is one of, and I think we're seeing that this year too, it's like it's one of just really understanding your origins, like pre-colonialization, understanding all the things that were already there, understanding that like all the problems in our countries right now are probably because of colonialism, and that we were a much more open culture before, and that we can return to that, and that returning to that will probably bring illumination to our past stories as well. And that's why the Xochipilli was the way it was, and why I like re-extended my dreads into my afro again and like claim space in this way. And yeah, I don't know, that like doing that and paying that respect to Xochipilli like helped me come into myself a lot afterwards and feel more comfortable in my own skin and like realize myself better. The same thing when I did the installation as Tezcatlipoca for the God of the Smoking Mirror, and it was in the same place that I did the hang installation, but a different month entirely. And it kind of got me down this road of thinking about these things of like, yeah, these old stories should be kept alive, because I think these gods are always going to be here, right? Like anyone who was created at one point or anyone that was found at one point is still going to exist. I just want them to be more present in the current times, and I feel like that's a respect that I can do to that half of myself, is to like help keep some of these stories alive, and hopefully soon like help share the resources of like those who are actually like scholars in the field and actually know about these things very well and are fully like masters of this culture.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
this is like so great. I love it, hearing from other artists about everything they're into and all about, especially ones that we get to work with. It's the bomb.
I'm excited to hear y'all's take on the piece.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming and talking with us. Do you have any projects you want to plug? Could you tell us where to find your work, all that kind of stuff?
On Instagram, if you just search my full name, Darian.Donovan.Thomas, you'll find me. You can also look on my website, which is hopefully, by the time this airs, updated. But also, who knows? Websites are annoying. But my website is darianthomas.myportfolio.com. And I don't know, I have a bunch of stuff coming up. Like there's a lot of I think the best thing to do is probably to just look at my Instagram, which is functionally my newsletter, or to search for the performance lists of like Arouge, Aftab, Moses Sumney, and Balùn. I know that we're playing at like some pretty big festivals next year. I am going to be down at ACL in October and doing the Outside Lands Festival in San Francisco, as well as 3 Points in Miami, I think. Some tickets just went on sale for Moses Sumney at the Ford Theater in LA as well. Yeah, but also like a bunch of little things just pop up all over the place. So as things happen, I'll try and post about them. And it'll be super fun.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Decipher This. Special thanks to Darian Thomas for joining us today. Your hosts today are me, Taylor Long, and Eric Lemmon. Today's episode was edited and produced by Joy Bohemian.